Let me remind every one of ourselves to take a moment and cultivate the highest form of motivation. We call it bodhicitta motivation, seeking complete enlightenment for the sake of all other sentient beings. And with that kind of motivation, we should participate in this Lamrim teaching on the stages of path leading to enlightenment by Manjushri Lama Tsongkhapa. Allow me to read about a page or two from this Lamrim text, volume number 3 in the English translation of the Lamrim, I think page 172, to give you the blessing of oral transmission first, followed by explanation.
Jungdele kajige do de banani lu kongji tong tang parame wadin omo na jo ko de che me wa kan ba te ni ome ten ju je te ko na ngo yo konye mewa yin xie chawa xewa chawa yang kanta achira dima nang je kong tong tang par mewa te uma pa nang je kunzo yin no nyam tu sima ta ke chawa ten ju te tin yong zo ma xie pa kwa na ten te ji ten de we xie ni ji de we xie tong suma me re we xie lo ni na tong ma yi pa we ye xie ke pa na yin e wa ra chawa xie sum pe de pa ta ke chu ta timo ma yi pe ta pe sung zin sha me so tan yi tu am thanh như tiếng mình sẽ đồ sĩ gia bên cho vào lễ cho chỉ trả ba ta rong de van rong de bắt năm de ba rong de va năm ji rong de ba năm ji dễ ji du cha ro ke long mi re zo xe du cha me ke long me ro ke du cha me ke me long song so de ba ni ji tu na me de ba ma be 고조 드 케메네 셔 케메네 바니 샤메 라서 비 고발라 차이 디인제 담바 건데 오마베 고조 드 케메라 담바 메데 수달서 버 대자게 뎀바라 데자 오마베 고조 더바게 노 시자베 저발레 옹부 드타라서 소비 갑제레니 안시지 조르 데바가 ông nông dân điều tra đang thì đang hiện mà cho bây giờ là tiền ta bảo đâm ta bảo năm xí chế tiền ta bảo tiền hiện điều năm mà cho tiền ta bây giờ ông ye đó xong ye mới xí bắt nông ngô xong ta bảo ta ye nó ngô xong sinh bảo xí lô bông de đó lô linh tiền chế 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 thong xí bảo anh trai ông bố đang yu nằm trên chỗ dưới mình rồi năng ngã ra ông gì rằng cái sinh là xem mấy bằng gốc bì cao nằm xa nằm ba hiện được nè bì ngô là nằm ba hiện được nằm xí rồi xí xuống bì ông bì xí vào số chỗ số rằng sinh như cho bạn năng ta ra rằng cái ta rằng cái sinh thanh như từ yung mấy bên năng lobon de tanye de yang de da chwa she ba yin no de da no ong bu she ba no tanye de su ra la so bi yu no na ban jo bi sem me sem ra me da me de te no chwa ba ra jo bi ji zen no da ra je rang ge sin ji zhe bi dong me ba ne rang ji me je bi ri bi shi bi ri zhe ba yin ji tanye bi se me de me zhe bi tanye bi shi ba la de de chwa ba ma yin no da ni no da su ni la so ba no me shi ba nāwa dāya lō tōng dāwa nī dāng xie xie lā sāpa mē bā tā nī bē sāma xie xie bē rī bē xie bā lā tē mē dē nzhū bē nāng tē tā wā tā wā ngā mā nāng lā yāng tā tōng lō bē kūn tō jē nāng bā rā chē yāng nāng bā rā chē yāng tē bā yī nō kē tē bē rī bē xie bā tāng tā nī bē sāma lā tē nī bē chū bā tō bē tē bē chē bā tō bē chē bā rā chē bā yu tē shok jāng xie xīn lā sō bā rā nāng mē tōng mē bā tā rāng kē tsīn jē chē bē tōng mē rāng kē tsīn jē tōng bē sū sō yu bā tā rā xie xīn lā sō bē tōng bē sīn lā sō bē yu tō tē chē rā tē tā lā tā nī bē lō rāng kā wā lā bā tē nē chōng chī chō lō mā lō chē wā mē tō nyam nā ngō nā rāng sē jē chē bē tōng ngō tāng xie xīn tē nā tā rā jē tōng nī tā nyē tē mē bā rā lā wā sū sō tāng sū nyē sō nyē tā nyē tē yā bā rā wā lā chōng chē lē tē nī chōng mā sō nyē tāng rā lā sō chōng sē chē nī zū yā mā rī bā tāng tē mā nā lā nāng lā ngō bā lā sō bā sū bā sū rāng ngō lā sō bā sū tāng sim tāng sō wā lā sō bā chōng sē chē nē tēn pā nā rāng chīn mā rī bā tāng tē mā nāng lā nā bā tē tē mē nāng tē chē tā kē kāng xē kuñ sō tē yā tē bā nē kuñ sō yé tē bā mā yī nō xē kuñ ngō bā lā sō bā kuñ sō tē bā rā jō bā sō sū nyē sō kuñ sō tē bā rā mē chē bē chē bā mē tō kē xē jī nā lē chē yō tē nyē tā nyē bē xē bā lā nā wā rā yō sō nyē lā sō bā nē mē jī tē bē xē bā nī kī sō bā rā tō bē jī tē yō kuñ sō yé tē bā rā mē chō lā ngō bā lā sō bā nē zō bā yīn jāng tē rā wā jē tē bē xē bē khōng tē chū bā rā mē nē bē jē tē jī kuñ sō tē bā rā jō gā nyam nā Kundu chiwa mini we jidin ye kunzo denbar jidin ye kudo mijogo nyana tetar yu tenyi la tanyi be shibal dwedi. Dinzi teba shindi yu chenyi yang tanyi be shibala dwedi shi lo ma lo teba inu ke tanyi be shibala dwedi shi lo ma lo shinji ma lo bayina tanyi diyo chuba dangi lo nyamna. Tanyi diyo chubi chuse tanyi dang shiba kang lo dwedi shinji lo ma lo shinji ma lo bar shinji ma lo bar shakbi tanyi be shiba nyi. Jī nāng gyā wā yīn jāng tā nī tī nī nī sō sō wā yīn bī jī shīng gī dē tar sō lā sō dē rē tar sō lā sō sō lā rāng kē sī nī rāng gā ngō chī wī rāng shīng rī bī gō bā nī tōng tōng dī mī rōng yī tā nī dī chā gu lā tēn rē tā nī bī shīng ngō rā tē nī āng bī shī bā nāng chū bā yīn lā tē lē shīng bī tā nī bī shī bā rāng gā bā nām jī ngō rā nī chū bā mā yīn bī Minge de perno jide betani la milala ne yu milala milala ne me je bo shente la la shebe ce je injang ye be la la zama me be la la ni tong je la me je bo jina den ya ma ju ne jide be shiba rang ga la de ne jo ge oma be ma ju wa me de do je de ni le de she so song ba tar di she oma be de do chu ba jo la Tētānā yu dzōmbā dzōbī gā bā mīngē dē yu dēn parā dzō nā yu jīn chūbī dzō parā dzō ngē wā yī nō tānyē dē chū tam shē jī mā tā wā ndē bā nā bē nā tānyē dē dzōmbā yīn jā kūn dzō dēn parā dzō bā mīngē dē mā rī bē rī dē mā rī bā rāng shīn jīb shē jī kūn dzō mā rī rāng shī jī kūn dzō dē shē sōng bē Mari be kunzo de ye ngura de bara de bara chu no la rang ye ngu choba go ba khang ge ngura sha be kunzo ba de ngur dun ba ni me ge be chu ru kunzo de yang dun ba de kunzo de ba ma no she sung ba ta ni be se mi dun ba do ba la cha ye ta ni de dun ba yin ba zong la cha me rung wo ta ti ni cha kiza shunzum ti sa yarsa lingdian ji ge ne nawa dar ta chidong ke ling ge tsu ga ga ge ne ma sukja la so ba on hi nawa dar ke ling ge des o di ka de sha da kharsa umbu di no shi ro kharsa no me da ji kharsa te lingdian ji ge ro Olha ching do tsar. Jungliel zendele. O te lingde ke le ya da ne jungliel khaji gin do de ban lu rang khang lu khang ye thong da me wa tin ne o ban ne kun zo de xie me wa khang yin ba de ne o me den ji ye ti ko ne ni ngom ba me si bi ko ne me ba yin o xie ba chao wo ji da di de ya khang jungliel da da 다 카지 제게서나 이네 니도 되니 로리아 돈담바디 너야 두간가 이네 엄마 비군도 된대 그랬어 다 엄마 tenjo 와라 봐 이제 라우네 어디 라우디 이네 오메기 비게 누디도 야고 마시베 기자 시고 그랬어 어디 가르잖아 두도 비게 다 뒤샤미세야 저 시바케지 샤미세야 두도간가 이네 돈담바 되고 와라 봐 얘네 두도 tenjo 요 말아 봐 그래서 콘주 동타원 되버 이네 텐조기야 이네 군조디 이베 차고 말이스 어디지 당연 콘주 동타원 염데 텐조게 요는데 저도 여도 여러 숙소서 간가 샤적으로 와 어디 있어 그자
Geshe read from the bottom of page 171 to 175 to give us the blessing of oral transmission first, and now he started to give explanation. Just to recapitulate where we left off last time, according to Baba Viveka, Lengdinchek in Tibetan, and others who follow his philosophy and who accept that there are externally existent objects. The Tibetan term is chidan. So there are external objects or external existent objects. according to their perspective, these things appear to our ordinary perceptions as being externally existent, and that's how they exist. They believe that the way they appear to our perceptions and the way they exist are just the same. So they believe in the externally existent objects. But according to Madhyamikins, that's not right. Some critics they started to explain that what is accepted as what we call ultimate reality, according to Vaibhashikas and Southern thinkers, is accepted as conventional reality according to Madhyamikins or the Prasangika Madhyamikins. Right? That's their explanation. But that's an incorrect explanation. There are things where those schools of thought accept as ultimate reality or truth, and where Madhyamikins might also assert that such things exist, but not necessarily ultimate reality. But there are a lot of things which those schools consider as ultimate reality, but Madhyamikins said they don't exist at all. For example, in the two lower schools of Buddhist thought, Vaibhashikas and Southern thinkers, they assert that there are partless particles, Gyeltsen Chame, right? And these are ultimate reality. They assert that there are partless consciousness, Sheba Chame, and they said this exists as ultimate reality. But according to Madhyamikins, right, forget about this being conventional reality. Prasangika Madhyamikins said they don't exist in the first place. So those are some of the things we talked about last time, and the distinctions we have to keep in our mind to be able to make sense of a debate or the arguments that is continuing still.
Young Kanda Shakira, you can't Tonda Bameva, Omabanam, you couldn't young December, Teda Kate Young. Then you take on Mashiba Kona, the Jiden, they shouldn't Jidevi, Church, Tuma Mary, said the loan in the Tumo Maiba. He kept on ever show, she so be Devata, could have Tumo Maibi. That be Sungzin Chami so, tiny to a Michelle Tos. That Dodeva. Karsa di Chitama Tonda was a duzita, Dodebe, Nova that Tonda by your Tonjira. That Chirama did the Warrior. Jumbo Lucy send any Ronzi long dog what the la any Gunzo to your was. That Jumbo Lucy Savannah and the Ronzi Lomond of the Tonda by your was. What is your Codita? But what dear Queen Josito Tonda by your that Dodebe Nova email say, Chitama. What is it? Because the Dishami, Hiba Shami sort of the Pumaka sort of doing, should to shadow, call send the lawyer, she send me because the Loman Juk base, the Pumji to go to the other Tonu you can see Lavara, she thought Louis Shaggy saw that the Toduna, consider combat is and the combat that comes what to Gaga, if I say no combat like Jigmar, what is all the good of Insuada. That cousin she never Shiva and Kokazin and Shiva on that digger or till Tonda by Yosigro. Which Rama did Queen Tonon do it today, Kevajata, Kajita, Omabalola, anything that Shiva Chame, the Kage, Tonum, the Kage, Kaling Mara.
Tondam the US of the Tondam Tamani and the Tani Kaka Pijigo. Conjatanda de Carsa, over in a Tondam.
Tondam to caps in it in Dodeva.
Demolition to go.
That moving to the moving Tonjiri. That Shirama, how
I was double careful if I'm translating the term correctly or not. So according to Southern thinkers, Dodeba, one of the lowest schools of Buddhist philosophy or tenets, for them, things, ngobo, are ultimate reality. In other words, what we call functional things and ultimate reality are synonyms, right? If something exists as a thing, and that thing is an ultimate reality, according to certain figures. But according to Vaibhashikas, Chedamawa, the other lower schools of Buddhist thought, they have a slightly different explanation about what is ultimate reality and what is conventional reality. Yeah. According to the Vaibhashikas, ultimate reality is a phenomenon that cannot be, let's say, destroyed literally, or cannot be even destroyed mentally, if you will, and its perception exists, whatever that phenomenon is. And such a phenomenon is considered as ultimate reality. Just an example, for example, our minds, according to them, are ultimate reality, because you cannot destroy the minds. There's always going to be, right, minds and perceiving minds, perceptions. But something, that if you destroy it literally, or you kind of deconstruct it mentally, if a perception apprehending that thing or phenomenon could not exist, so such things or phenomena are considered as conventional reality according to Vaibhashikas. For example, let's say we have a house, right? So a house is a structure, and we have a perception, right, that recognizes there is a house. Now, for whatever reasons, we destroy the house completely, right? We literally destroy it, right? And then once it is destroyed, we do not have any more a perception of that house, right? And so therefore, the house is a conventional reality. And some things, we cannot destroy them literally, but we can mentally deconstruct them, right? We just take it all, eliminate mentally, right? This part, this part, this part. So finally, right, we also could not have any more perception of that phenomenon. So such a phenomenon is also considered as a conventional reality, according to Vaibhasika's school of thought.
어디 거사 당연히 힘이 시작은 저와래 지자바 나랑게 대번 남지 제기 뒤처럼 켈나 미르소 히 뒤참이 켈나면 송소스 자기 다다다 너 대바다 지라마 두디게 두디나기 오마베 뒤참이다 히바참이 켈링 말이지 다티 잡되는 진짜와 어디 시작은 저와래 아니 지자바 다 시자바선 치료 바로 치료도 다 뒤참이 켈링 그러와 제가 듣는 이 랑기 대바서게 인디 뒤처라데 켈링 거리디 켈라는 디고 말이지 인디 시작은 저와 송샤스 다 간제 랑을 켈밀이空地
So at the bottom of page 172, there is a reference to great Indian master Chandrakirti's commentary on Aryadeva's 400 stanzas or Shikyaba, Chatukshedag, which basically tells us that Prasangika Madhyamikans do not accept partless particles and partless perceptions or consciousness. And so that's the reference source, if you will. Just like in some non-Buddhist schools of thought, my first footnotes in some Hindu schools of thought, that's what we meant. And also within our own schools of thought, like Vaibhashikas and Sautrantikas, they accept that there are partless particles, there are partless consciousness, if you will. But according to Prasangika Madhyamikans, the highest Buddhist school of thought, they even don't exist. There is no such thing as partless particle or partless consciousness.
대원이 돈돈 대원 엄마 군도도 미케면에 봤네. 참여를 뭐를 제가 뒤이 대마 건데 엄마 군도도 미케는 도면도 수라로서 뭐 대다기 대마 여기 엄마 군도도 연대와 해놓고 대다단다 도만이 얘네 가 돈도 보면 와디 엄마 군도도 써야 엄마 대관하니 미셔봐 있어 중대 식도와 다 디책들이야 용조야 다 동조식으로 제다디 ene tomani ke langze ganga oma be gunzo de ke lang mari lago yo mari sero du shami da ene shiba ge ji shami kane da konzo do de ba da shitama kono do da tu mai do da ha je ro o dige de ne oma ke le mari ser ma se do da le ji de so de gunjo ser de chi ba ro o di ke le ge de sta di himju chi himju chi da
And so as Rich said earlier, it's not that Pasangika Madhyamikins, do not accept everything that Sautrantikas and Vaibhasikas accept to exist. Yeah. But here, what we focus on or emphasize is that in the Vaibhasika and Sautrantika schools of thought, they accept partless particles, Gyeltsen, and partless consciousness, Shebachame, and they consider this as ultimate reality, right? But according to Pasangika Madhyamikins, they even don't exist at all. Okay? And because they think this is something unique assertions according to Vaibhasikas and Sautrantikas, but this uniqueness from Pasangika's point of view is their own mental fabrication, right? Something that doesn't exist, but they said it exists. So Pasangika said, we differ, right? But other things that are accepted by both schools of thought are things like a law of karma and its outcomes, right? Or the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, right? The Sautrantikas, Vaibhasikas accept, and Pasangikas accept those things as well.
Because Shijaban Devales, Ombu Ducharos of Gabi, Rene, Onshi Jurundova Gaji, Ombu Namjan, Dutar, Tower of Dung, Tini Dang Shin, and Shindu Motobe, Tedala Tene, Taba, Taba, Namshi Gage. 电影了，这现在越南讲电影大概到于安溪节有的送些是在电视里看的，安博社的俺做安博社的俺绿草的吧，知道吧？这安博这个安溪就是是我了吧？现在这里也打通在内呢，安溪不是安博的绿在的呢，安溪这个了是打通在个在这个干啥事？知道吧？他这个安博知道呢，可能被多做啥嘛？这打通在内呢，安博都是。 안보 대인의 안식 저러고 작은 말에서 나 거기 그래서 안기도 안구 리브로 봐. 그래서 당연히도 안식 안보 찍어야 돼. 당선 전에 안구 뒤레렌스도 세위나. 얘네들 준대 샤토 말해서 가샤스. 다 그래 안 지켜야 돼. 평소 때는 다 안보 대야 안식 대야 안보 때는 자 안보 안식 때는 또 좀 샤 말이지. 진짜 초도들의 작은 말에서.
Madhyamikins accept that what are called sensory faculties do give rise to sensory perceptions or consciousnesses. In other words, there is a cause and effect relationship between sense faculties and sensory perceptions or consciousnesses. But they do not assert that kind of cause and effect relationship as something intrinsically existent. By that, what that meant is if we are going to put this cause and effect relationship under microscopic ultimate analysis, right? Okay, you said that faculties generate perceptions. Now, faculty consists of so many aggregation of elements and particles. Right? Which element is generating it? Let me see. Is it this one? Is it that one? Well, if you do that kind of ultimate analysis, you don't find anything to exist. And so you won't find answer to your question, isn't it? But conventionally speaking, there is a cause and effect relationship between faculties and sensory perceptions because both of them are mutually dependent upon each other, isn't it? We call a sensory faculty because of its relationship with sensory perception or consciousness, and we call a sensory consciousness because of its dependence on the sensory faculty. So based upon that kind of interdependent origination, conventionally, they do exist, and sensory faculties do generate or give rise to sensory consciousness or perceptions, but in the ultimate sense, there is no such thing. Okay.
그래서 대신에 윤남장 때문에 딱비 도요의 시당 응시유의 송진 시바는 무슨 딱 봐도 윤은 무슨 생이바 시에베스 로운 대당 로운링 대지 인지 치료 예, 동시에는 자양 엉보당 아니 유난지 요즘면도 나오 세다 링딩 있는 뒤에다 엉보디 차라 당동시에는 엉보디 차라 레레카니 이니 언시 주인 쓰기로와
No, sir.
야 다가는 시를 유일신나 유디 미견샤고로와 엉보디 다진로와
Lari.
어또 제다든다 이는 반대 나와 잡을로선다 단디 상시장 로라인 디레샤고 말이지 시동 켈렘바데 찍바레디 시나 시동 켈렘 언시 제동 유시하게 되는 콘이 쳐버도도 와
Lari, no, sir.
근데 디 반대 나와 로르신다 얘는 엉보다 언시니 못에 또 접시
No.
얘는 언시다 유인이데 또 접변 송지 미시다 송이데 또 접시 그니까 또 접셔도 와
Lari.
미지 거의 유 당동센 당근에 가르치는데 바제는 지셔고 말아
No.
어디 지도민들보다 가서 되버다 찍바래 대신에 지도도 진다고 말이라고
No. So the middle paragraph on page 172, it's mentioned that although Baba Vivekas, Loban Lengdenche, and Chandrakirti, Pandan Dawa Thakpa, they both accept external objects or externally existing objects, Chidun. But there's a difference in how they come to that assertion, if you will. According to Baba Vivekas might more likely say that in the case of a sensory faculty generating a sensory perception, every element or the particles of that sensory faculty actually is a cause generating a sensory perception. Yeah? So there is intrinsic reality, right? According to Baba Vivekas, that there is intrinsic relationship between a sensory faculty and sensory perception consciousness. So therefore, every particle of the sense faculty gives rise to a sensory perception. But according to Chandrakirti's and what it is, how can I forget his name? Chandrakirti and Sankhya Buddhapalita, I have to say in Tibetan, I was like, what am I saying? Buddhapalita, yes, there are external existing objects, but they don't exist intrinsically. That's true that a sensory faculty generates or gives rise to a sensory perception consciousness, but this is simply something due to their mutual dependence upon each other in a conventional sense, but there is no intrinsic connection between sensory faculty and sensory perception. For example, like if you think of a visible form and a perception of that form, isn't it? So in order for a visual perception to perceive a form, certain conditions have to be assembled together, right? There has to be objective condition. There is a visible form, right? And but that's not enough to generate a visual perception of that form. There has to be what we call Takyen, sort of a fundamental condition, which is the sensory faculty, right? Eye sense faculty. And so then other conditions as well. So because of coming together of these conditions, then we are able to perceive a visible form. But it's simply because of this what we call conventional dependence upon each other, these things happening according to Chandrakirti and Buddhapalita. But according to Baba Viveka, no, there is something intrinsically there, and that's why it's happening, right? So that's a big difference in their assertions, even though both masters accept external objects, Chidun.
어디 레저시 다 셔도 텐주로 되셔그랬어. 애니 무슨 거들 유일파샤. 시바도 무슨 딱 봐요. 나 미기양 나왜 시바세요. 건지 무슨 통수세요. 무슨 세게 저러와.
네.
어제 셔도 뒤다 텐주에게 유인줘야 돼. 니데베 그게 제당 좀도 나시 샤유세요. 어디래. 간지데면 무슨 세는 봐 유일도 그러면 시바도 말봐.
네.
근데 무슨 자 대세야지 대세도 말봐.
네.
어디는 시작했어요. 자.
No,
무슨 세야디 뭐니디 유일파샤. 디 통계디 무슨 딱 봐. 당근 시바 무슨 세 무슨 시바선 분지 세마세까지 세마세야 요 말에 어디 무슨 가서 저도 무슨 시바디 많이 무슨 세마디 많이 쓰고 말이지. 저도 무슨 딱 봐. 인식을. 무슨 뭐니디 유일파샤 그랬어. 어디서.
One thing I forgot to mention earlier is this. that according to Prasangika Madhyamikins, the highest Buddhist school of thought, their assertion of objects or phenomena actually accords with the worldly conventions, how the worldly accept things to exist, if you will, in a sense that when we talk about ngunsum, direct perception, right, something that is manifestly present called ngunsum, right, that you can directly access it. Yeah. So according to Prasangikas, let's in the case of direct visual perception of visible form, the ngunsum, that which is visible, that which is manifestly visible, ngunsum, if you say, where is it? They're going to point there, right? It's there. They're not going to say like here, right? So it always refers to that object. The ngunsum refers to object, but the perceiver is simply called, for lack of a better term, called ngunsum takpaba, imputed, what called direct visible thing. Yeah? And so that's how the world says. Like if you say, hey, where is that thing, right? You're going to point over there. You're not going to point over to the perceiver, right, to the subjective mind. So that's why we often say Prasangika Madhyamikins really, they do respect the worldly conventions and they accept the worldly conventions.
na lobon di tanye te yang de da chuba sheba ino se da ngonzu konji onshi khan ba de da ini da da kizan onshi na da chuguma se na da su ke le ling den ji na da chuba ke ling go se thank you ke ling ba ko ni de za wa de de wa se da do so za ini da da ngonzu da da ji ni yi se na da pumzi mi ge de kha se o shiba ganga ini de le ya na da ke ling bu chuba shi ge se go 출발시고 출시되게 이나고 출시이나 양고 그 유모도 용요 말이죠. 대단한 응부시반 단위 수라서 유는 넘어져 있으면 메데 되는 출발 조비 유제 나와다 이 랑생이버로 도매에 랑신이 제비 어디에 군속 출발하다 가르 출세는 랑생이 출발 출마도 지로 속다 그런 통화도 다다 통되어와. 제도 그 출사다 그런 통화니 가가래스. 제도 그런 랑신이 출발을 트나 속을 추어 말이죠. 그 세마 샤쪽으로 해서 왔다. 근데 랑주 미제 되게 유들 세마 있는 될 모두 잡서 와라. 다 tenjiwa 유들 추바다 유들 세마니가 히디셔 거래. tenjiwa 체주를 그래. 네.
So according to Prasangika Madhyamikins, our sensory perceptions or sensory consciousnesses, Wangshe, are mistaken. Our perceptions or mistaken consciousness or deceptive. The Tibetan word is called Truva is mistaken and Phuntsok is deceptive. Okay. And what do they mean by that? Our sensory perceptions are mistaken in the sense that their respective objects appear to them as intrinsically existent, but they really don't exist in that mode, isn't it? So it is mistaken with regard to that. Things appear to them as intrinsically existent, but they do not exist in that way. So therefore, our sensory perceptions are mistaken with regard to that intrinsic reality. But at the same time, this is a unique, one of the unique assertions of the Prasangika Madhyamikins. Although our sensory perceptions are mistaken perceptions per se, but there could still be valid perceptions, isn't it? Why? Because our, let's say, a visual perception, it perceives correctly or unmistakably visible form as its object. So it's not mistaken with regard to its object, and so is the case with auditory perceptions, right? They are not necessarily mistaken with regard to their sounds, okay? But they are mistaken with regard to the forms and sounds as appearing intrinsically existent. Right? So according to Prasangika Madhyamikins, we the ordinary people, our sensory perceptions are mistaken, but they could also be valid perceptions, right? But for other Buddhist schools of thought, like Savatandika Madhyamikins, the sub-school of the Middle Way school, and the schools below, for them, like, no, right? I mean, you can't have a mistaken perception, and then you call them a valid perception. That doesn't work, right? And so therefore, they might assert that things appear to them as intrinsically existent, and that's how they exist. That's why they are valid, you know. You cannot be valid and the mistaken at the same time, right? So there's a big difference, isn't it? So Prasangika Madhyamikins is a unique assertion is, our sensory perceptions are mistaken, right? But they can also be valid. We are not saying they're all valid all the time, but they can also be valid. Okay? So that's the big difference in their standpoint.
tenju anshi chu se de rang sin chu chu se go wa she da rang sin chu chu se de di rang sin ma zo de any rikhi to na ma do ji de de to to yo ma ra se ta da anshi so se ma dal se ma sin ji de shi ya xin she de wo wa she da ko chu sa da ko na to sa de ka ka de so o ti yin se wa da.
So if you ask Prasangika Madhyamikins, you know, how can you come up with such an assertion? You say, on the one hand, that our sensory perceptions are mistaken. Then on the other hand, you said they could also be valid, right? What do you mean by that exactly? So Prasangika say, this is what we mean. We say that ordinary sensory perceptions are mistaken because, you know, things appear to them as intrinsically existent, but they don't exist that way. Of course, the perceptions themselves don't know this, okay? So they are completely goofed right here. But how do we know this? But if we do what we call analytical meditation, do the analysis, then we can find out that things appear to us as intrinsically existent, but they really don't exist that way. So with our cognitive process set and logical mindset, critical thinking can verify that. Things don't exist intrinsically, but they appear to us. So that's where our perceptions are mistaken. But our perceptions, our sensory perceptions are also valid, can be. Why? Because if we go by the worldly conventions, right, the visual perceptions see forms, auditory perceptions hear the sounds, right, olfactory perceptions, you know, detect the smell, and they're all valid, right? So from worldly standard and convention point of view, Prasangika said, we accept that these ordinary sensory perceptions can be valid with regard to their respective forms, but they are mistaken with regard to intrinsic nature of things.
Rewa onji rang sin chwa sa chi sa di ome ripe na leo ngor ba ji da jigden tanye she na ine ta da pen dan ji nyen she da phumsi mi ji so ine yang da kun zo she da wa ni na shi ba khar sa da zu zo gang ka ine log be kun zo di sha sho na ba sha tin na me te ba te ge des khar sa na da wa ni mai ba da be na shi ji su ni shi shi mai ba de ngan zo su yin to to gor ba o de to so ine yang da log be kun zo chwa chwa de o de te ge des. So
we are on page 173, second paragraph from the top. So when we talk about conventional phenomenon, Kunjab Demba, and it can be of two kinds. That which is what we call Yangda means, literally means perfect, but I don't think, but it's true, right? That which is correct, that which is true, and that which is false, or that which is deceptive conventionality. So conventionality can be what we call a false conventionality, and there can also be true conventionality. And this kind of presentation is done from the worldly standards of point of view. Because as a worldly people, we know that among the conventionalities, some things are true and some things are false. Okay? And we know that I'm enjoying, well, Geshe didn't say that, now I throw that example. Right? I'm enjoying music, so my ear is kind of all right, hearing this sound, And it's valid, right? And the sound is true, and my ear is processing it, and I'm just enjoying it, isn't it? And my eyes can see things, and it's true, right? The things I'm seeing are not imaginative things, they're there. Okay? But as worldly people, we know there are certain things, conventionalities, they are false. And one of the examples is that, our face in the mirror, isn't it? Our face is reflected in the mirror, and to us it appears as real face. But we can find out that my face is not in the mirror. My face is here. It's just simply reflected there. It appears as my face, but it's not my face, right? So therefore, we would consider that the reflection of the face in the mirror appearing as face is false, conventionally. It's not face. It is just a reflection, right? And just like that, due to some circumstances or whatever, some people started to see double visions of the moon, right? There are two moons, right? Yeah, right. How many moons are there? It's only one. So if you're seeing two, well, maybe you need to check your eyes or something, right? So there is this false conventionality, because in reality, there's only one moon. If you are seeing 2 or 3 moons, well, that is not correct, right? So that kind of distinction among the conventionality as true or false is something we are capable of doing as ordinary people. Okay? Now, when the Madhyamikans say that our worldly perceptions are mistaken with regard to how things appear to them, right, intrinsically, and how they exist, now that is something ordinary people cannot usually process and understand on our own. That requires, right, the study and analysis, isn't it? It's through analysis and critical thinking we say, yeah, this is how things appear as intrinsically existent, but do they really exist that way? We have to critically assess that, and then we can find out, yeah, there is a disparity between the way they appear and the way they exist, right? And this requires some more thinking and study. It's not, something any ordinary person can figure out on his own or on her own. And so remember, so we talked about how, according to Pasankhya Madhyamikans, when they talk about correct or incorrect perceptions, that is usually done from the worldly point of view, whether there are causes of errors which are transitory in nature, right? And so if your perceptions are influenced by transitory causes of errors that we talked about, double visions of the moon, or like, you are in the mirror, or that, so those are false perceptions. But the fact that we all have this basic ignorance that is influencing all our perceptions, everything appears to us as intrinsically existent, but everything doesn't exist in that way, that is not considered as a cause of error, right, tulju, right, in this context. Because in this case, then we have no valid perceptions at all, because every perception we experience is influenced by basic ignorance. Okay? So that's the kind of distinctions we talked about before, and we're just reminding ourselves again.
Ini melona sunyin da de tongge de lobe gun do sharwa miki kona lobe gun do shagorwa de da de zowe mja je zo koni de ini danda sugja la sa de miki de zo ini miki de ini yangda gun do sha melona shehin zinyin ge ini sunyin tong ini miki de lobe gun do shana te men do karsena ani sugja la sa de zo rang zinyin Chuba na da ma zhe de korang su zha le do za de ge go de han de bas. De ga ne me na xie yi su yin ze ba de korang me ka za xie yi korang de yo ma de xie na me na xie yi su yin na yo ra bas. Xie da de mi xi la su na ye ba na xi su yin ji be mi xi de su yin na yo ra bas. Xie de ko ni chui wa ji ba ji na yu ji ge ye ba ji ba le de bas. Xie de su ji mi xi da de zo ne yang da gong zo xia ini melona xie xie de lobe gu de xie de de ge bu de da de ge de rang ju me je zo ge ka sa yu jian le de lobe gu de ya xia guo ma da ge ji yu le me xia ma ba ting ju ini yu de yu lo ba ini yu jian lo ba xia ni nyam do xia guo ba o di zo ba de yin sa de
ale yu lo pe kun jobda ale rangi ba meje ki ke ka sa kun
유
job
뭐
ya
저 히발 로베
yang lo se ko yu rang se ko
유랑 세
ale
유진 영어 요 말이
lo
tinyo ta yu lokpa so da yu jin lokpa sha ro ra pe be na shi yi sung ye me za in de na de yu jin lokpa yi do pa sha go ra o ta shi na de sha go ma re o ti zhe ba yi zhe bi shi可以ke ba de ma shi ti zhe ba de do
So on page 173 in the middle, a qualm has been raised, a doubt has been raised, or a question has been asked here, and so the critics said, what the distinction you just made between the true conventionality and the false conventionality, that doesn't seem to make sense. They said, we don't agree with that distinction, because what you said is that ordinary perceptions, they could be valid with regard to their objects, isn't it? And you said that, we heard you, that they appear intrinsically existent, but they don't exist intrinsically. But nonetheless, you said that the forms appear to the visual perceptions, and as the forms appear, and regard to that form appearances, they are valid, right? And sounds, appear to the auditory perceptions and whatever the sound image is, right? And it is valid with regard to that. Okay? So in the same way, with our face reflected in the mirror, they said, we understand that you are saying that that's a reflection, that's not a real face, but still you should say that there's appearance of a face in the mirror, right? And your perception is valid with regard to that appearance. Okay? So therefore, the distinction you started to make is, not making a difference here. Okay. Now, why this kind of a thing debate comes up is this, that according to Sevatantika Madhyamikans, the sub-school within Mahayana and the schools below, they do talk about false conventionality and true conventionality, but all of those presentations done with regard to the object, on the basis of the object, not on the basis of subjective perceptions, but on the basis of the object. But the Prasangika Madhyamikans are making this difference on the basis of subjective experience, isn't it? Because they said, the reason why we call that, the reflection of the face in the mirror appearing as a face, as a false conventionality, is because it appears as a face, right? But it's not a real face. So that's incorrect, right? Because of that incorrect appearance of the object, so your perception is also incorrect. Because if you think that's a real face, you're wrong. But according to the other schools of thought, they only talk about what we call false and true conventionality, Yangda Kunzom and Lope Kunzom, with regard to the object, not with regard to the subjective perception. So Prasangika is right. That's why this debate comes up again. Okay?
어디 가서 뭐냐면 오늘 랑생이 되면 뭐다 제시도 나다 이 돈이가 타니는 원자라 수소당 숭이 소니가 타니도 원자라 용계를 다들 시도 됐던 거보다 그래서 근데 얘는 저는 다 유를 얘는 영어 쳐봐 shago 봐 어디 shago 됐어 뒤에는 다래 얘는 이제 용계 값을이야 얘는 면하게 신인 수행돼서 얘는 로베고도 야야시 얘는 저다디 부지미기서 단진이서도 양다군도 샤도 봤어 그때 말다 ngombol아서라 그냥 이제는 이제 말 유라 ngom보다 얘는 다 범바가와라서도 양다군도 샤도 봤어 숭예도 얘는 로베고도 샤도 봤어 뒤에는 저런데 다 디스케시나는 지금도 아시고 다 거기니까 숭예 나와요 지금 되게 줄이 봐도 파다가 누구로 와 어디서다 근데 다 런지 저런 놀이나 얘는 밀론는 숭예지 세계 숭예도 로베고도 샤 범바다 가와라서 와도 양다군도 샤와 대금도 왔어 이래와 가르에서는 범바거나 나와다 매바든 직발에 얘는 범바 나와되면 범바 예바신데 숭예 지시되면 숭예 요르와 어디서다 유일 저런 영어 인시하면 됐어 다 거기 지도한테 받은 거로 와 도다 집어 줘서 어디서 어디 샤야데 다디 중리에 가서 어디 캐바 챤 샤샤 스르바 몽볼라서 양다군도 샤 애니 숭예다 그래서 애니 로고군도 샤샤 다디 키 롱지바 켈 셈나바 켈 수강게 켈렌 그러와 제다다 유르 양로 샤야면도 스와 다 당기디 유젠 양로 샤 태그면도 지당으로와 다디바 고zum 그리고 파다면서
So at the bottom of page 173, we have a passage quoted from Chandrakirti's explanation of the middle way, Madhyamik Avatar or Umajupa, if you will. And so now the Prasangika Madhyamikins are basically using the same logic of the critics. So you know what? I'm going to use the same logic that you use against me to tell you that you cannot assert there is a true and false conventionalities on the basis of the objects, you know. Because according to the Seventh-Dantic Madhyamikins and also Chitta Martin's mind-only school, they would say that the blue, right, the color blue, it is a true conventionality, whereas the reflection of a face in the mirror is a false conventionality on the basis of the object. That's what they say, right? So the logic you're using against us to say that we cannot make a distinction between false conventionality and true conventionality based upon subjective experiences, that logic also applies back to you exactly the same way. How could you make a distinction between false conventionality and true conventionality on the basis of objects, right? How can you say, like blue, red, and these are true conventionalities, and reflection in the face in the mirror is a false conventionality? Just tell me, you know, how is that a false now, right? So they're using the same logic against their viewpoint.
어디 다다다 아니 어디 숭예라서 봐서 애는 로베군도다 누공볼라서 봐서 히바지 가르치는 이거라 가지 되게 양다군도 샤워 되게 말스 슬라로와 다딜라 다고 렌드입니다 디니가 타니베 히바 나완다요 숭예라서 번 지데베 히바니 zu바도베 지데고데 덴반조 민조 카르사 제레 지데 군조 데마 조금 lokpa 조그래 세거리 ngombol라서 봤니 줌바 지데메 타니 히베 콩디 시바 미니베 지데 군조 데마 조그 냠나세 다 렌데라 코니 트데버데 지과레세 이나 애니 무지 미기 나와다 마도 지데 랑가 또토고 마레세 다 숭옌지베 미히도 아니 지데 랑가 코 지야디 메와딜 숭예 샤신 지야제로와 어디 지데 랑가 또토고 야레세 큐버 지와레 대신에 코니 추지 똑상데 지데 랑가 또토모도 켜봐야 대샤네 애니 공부 양다군도 샤 애니 숭예데 가래 로베군도 샤 테게레스 다디
대tenji 무슨 거
대tenji 말했대 저기 유를 높아셔거라 어디야 유 열로 쳐셔거라
알아 전에 양주성로 경에 디직 초스 알아 ngombola 소바데 양다군도 임을 가르스나
양다군도서는 고 양다군도 임에 그래서 코 나와도 뭐로 지데 랑가 또토고 말와 다 미로나 그 시수에도 코로나 나와는 비하데 지데 랑가 또토고요라
알 나마다 쓰는 ngombo데 랑신이 좀 나마다 또
ngombo다 그 트베 차들 다 랑신이 좀 나 차요데 대지대 랑가 주도요 뭐 그런 ngombo에 다가라면 트베 차요 말와 어때 양다군도 인스 tenjiro kono lo shi da ko yang ta ko chwa de yo ma ra ti jide shi ko yang da re de ra o da sungye de jidan jide zumba ji ge ra wa ko yo ma ra ji sok na ni shi ji gun ne ta sa yo ma ra o ti si wo da she de ti she da da ti she de pa ta de ta yin zo da di da ge men do ene ngombo de ne ga ko ka sa gon ji mi hi da ene che shi sungye na ge ni chwa de ji ba de shi na ngombo de na da mo zo ba 또벌라 아니 리힐되고 그래 다다 세계승에 나와도 뭐도 리힐되고 뭐 지대랑가 또 그래 봤어 디사도 아니 ngombo데 가래 아니 양다군도다 세계승에도 가래 노베군
다디 랑게데 랑주버라고
어때라 랑주버라고 다기 디서와 간주 동보데 아니 다다 유진 lokpa 인스 샤윈서 다다 간주 태조하게 아니 메로나 세계승에 나 히바 유진 lokpa시 애는 본지 미기다 어디 유지에 양다 샤러와 되게 되게 문도스 거니 랑시도 나 추에 샤여 봐 지와래 유여 봐 지와래 이는 지금 로바 지 양다 샤야 민도스 동보 동서러와 유지에 양로 샤다 저러와 다디지 레드잖아 다 파랑질 파시고 되는 저런 애는 메노나 시 수녀디 애는 로바 군도 샤 pomba가와 ngom보라서 양다 군도 샤야 민도 아세 可你鱼吧，这吧这吹边下雨吧，这吧怕当是吧？我就当个当山吧。他第两个的时候嘞，这吹吧这吧的，现在从年老百工作下的，我不老说话，养大工作可以下个呢，从年的那是这鱼的嘛，这不几点那个到头的，我们那的话到头嘛，我底下的可以养老下的。
我那的嘛，如果到头嘛，我不让亲主
哦，这是我的。
So we're still on page 173 at the bottom and over page 174. According to Prasangika Madhyamikans, from subjective point of view, they talk about distinction between false and true conventionality, right? For example, they said that visual perception, perceiving visible form, right, is what we call a correct, true conventionality. What am I doing this? That's right. True conventionality because it is validly perceiving the form, right? Validly perceiving the form. Whereas the reflection of the face perceived as the real face, that perception is a false conventionality because that is not the real face, right? That's how Prasangikas started to make a distinction between false and true conventionality, Yangda Kunzam and Lopel Kunzam in Tibetan, from subjective point of view. Now, the Sevatantrika Madhyamikans, they make a distinction between false and true conventionalities from the objective point of view. Okay? And for them, color such as blue is a true conventionality, whereas reflection of face in the mirror is a false conventionality. And you asked him, how do you make the distinction? So Sevatantrika Madhyamikans will say that the blue is a true conventionality from objective point of view because the ordinary people do not detect or do not see that the way blue appears to their perception and the way it actually exists. Okay? It appears as intrinsically existent, but the ordinary people don't know that it appears intrinsically existent and it exists intrinsically. Okay? And therefore, it is a true conventionality. Whereas the reflection of a face in the mirror is a false conventionality because ordinary people can easily say, right, that is a reflection, that's not the real face. Okay? They can objectively make the distinction. So that's how the Sevatantrika Madhyamikans explain the distinction between true and false conventionality from objective point of view.
现在我他过年节的来，我这可以那吹吧几块呢了，经济的让个怎么多，这到头么的年节是吧？他这到那余年了，他那边写吧的，临时贴吧去，有些年节他那边写吧的，星期六么了贴吧一弄是，但这是呢，因为以前了养老下手的是吧？从这没去，可是我这没去的养大工作下是吧？哎，你可是的从年这没去的个的，老百工作下手的，可是呢。可你这当个吹吧几块的，鱼吧几块的，但是这个要不过直接让个只有多么多的钱要鱼现在下头了吧？
听就别怕了。
哦，听就怕了，对，听就怕，可能现在从业者没的老板工作意思，我这没的，让他工作没得几块了吧？听就现在的，让就现在几块对个了吧？现在的现在，对个了，现在有些人对呢，虽然他呢。几天那个到他们在那养老旅游些个多啊，他那一天就个他的没去听了，那个有的几天那个怎么到么到，但那有钱了吹下头个现在有钱了养老吃完贴个的，对，有的有些都吃过了吧？我就是个。
So on page 174, Prasangika Madhyamikans are telling the Sevatantrika Madhyamikans and others who follow the same assertion here that just like you assert true and false conventionality from objective point of view, and we could use the same thinking mindset to talk about true and false conventionality from subjective point of view as well. And the explanation you gave could also be applied to the subjective perceptions as well. And so we would say that ordinary people really do not, detect or figure out that even though the blue appears as intrinsically existent to their perception, but it doesn't exist in that way. Okay? And so from that point of view, we can say that perception is true conventionality. Okay? Whereas ordinary people, you said, can understand that reflection of face in the mirror is not the real face. So based upon that understanding, they can also understand that the perception that goes with it is a false conventionality, because your perception sees the reflection as a real face, but it's not a real face. So you can also understand that as well. So why can't you accept that there is a true and false conventionality from subjective point of view as well? So that's what the Prasangika Madhyamikans are telling Savatandika Madhyamikans. I think the Savatandika Madhyamikans and other Buddhist schools of thought, their presentation of true and false conventionality really is done from the objective conditions or the objective point of view, because that's how the worldly people see it, right? Something like, is that a true? Is that a false? Right? That's how we always look in that direction. Yeah, we really don't think in terms of like, is my perception true or false? So we don't think that. We just think, right? There's something true or false in the objects. Okay? But the Prasangika Madhyamikans say that, so based upon that, objective distinctions we make between false and true conventionality, now we can also understand false and true conventionality with subjective minds, because that goes with them, right? If the object is true, maybe the perception of that object is true as well. If the objective is false, just like face of reflection face in the mirror, then the subjective perception that goes with that is also false as well. So this is how the distinctions come about. So we will stop there, and maybe there's a lot of things, there could be some unclear parts or a lot of questions, so we will yield to you for questions and clarifications we need to do. So you ask questions, Geshe said, then we have a chance to explain it again.
Now, this is kind of a general question. Right. Because the whole chapter deals with valid establishment.
Right.
So earlier we read that the world that we perceive is a product of ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
So then what is the point of dwelling on the validity of falsities?
Mm-hmm.
Why call our ignorance valid cognition or valid knowledge?
Why don't we call our...
Why do we call... I'm continuing in the same
right.
line. Why call our ignorance valid cognition?
Oh, I see.
See, from a pedagogical point of view, it seems to be confusing, because it seems to be certifying, actually. By calling it valid, you're certifying the operation of ignorance.
Okay.
Why exactly? By the way, Chandrakirti doesn't dwell so much on validity of things as much as on kappa. There is a difference there from what we're reading. I don't know if Geshe also can comment on it. This seems to be Tsongkhapa's system specifically, not so. It's not so obvious from Chandrakirti's.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Korangi chidang kandi shue chidi yue sudu gen. Tanda karisa ure. Pena da dagi nganzo chorji na karisa karisa na da chegi kyuju ki leba maado pugu tuju shegi omarwa gen. Pugu tu chabena nganzo da jikdenbe sheba kangalo ani tenzingi lede izarwa ka chuba janarwa gen. Chidi kala ata tanda de yangda da kunzo ka namsa she yungorwa gen. Adi she di chik chidi kala ya nganzo tenzin la ya tenpa chingen rabu tu sagorwa gen. Kainsa na da kwa tenzin kwa da chuba lo rwa gen. Ine tenzin kwa digde gar singa rwa gen. Ko pu che chu kaza pu chu ju pa sha sha rwa gen. Tenzin yue ne lo chama yin chok rwa sla rwa gen. Chidi en tenzin la ya da kaza tenpa chin de gen rwa gen. Dinde tong du che di king sessions na ro nas rwa gen. Dene kwa ta ta che we na ta ta de nganzo yu le ya yang lo ke ba da yu jin la che yang lo ke ba sha go rwa gen. Dinde gi ta kaza semen nam sha di Pandan dawa thakpa ki ruwa ke.
Ore.
There's some sungi ayu some konang nawa chana ruwa ke. Dike the sama lo jermuchi ki ruwa. Ay ma chik tuaba nangi yuna chik men ruwa ruwa ke. Adi kari na su dana.
Ale yujel yonglo sha de sigurwa.
Dale da yi jenda yul yang lo sha ruwa ke. Dike di pandan dawa ki ruwa ke. Shida di thwal ya shumne rab chunga ayu jermuchi ki ruwa. Di thwal mangbo chi shuk chunga chi sung de me ruwa su ke.
Ale yonglo. Ale ta tangbo de la ruwa. Tangbo de da karasana the yonglo sha de kara shagar sana de sigurwa da. Dinzi no kya de juyo ma de. 그래서 영어샤데 지대 랑가 어지상 장수 될 샤고로 와. 시다 지대 랑가 되게 닌지도 출시에 뭐 하고 요 말와. 야 뭐전 코샤야다. 시다 용다 대샤. 다 갑도 응도 출이네 배 도구세 봐도 그래서 맥주 집어나 좀 줘야돼 지대 랑가 요로 봐. 다 뒤가도 왜 너야 유대 여민이 지대 제바 죽도 오로 와. 동이 깨라가 요 봐라. 시다 다다 용다 거도 로버고도 해야 돼. 지대 랑가 온걸 해야 뭐 이제 돈이 돼 봐. 아무도钱내 데 샤고 마다. 제가 디스고 딘지도 고 지대 랑가 딘지 뭐 하고 말아.
뭐 샤샤 다 걸고 나면 샤샤 계시 거 말아.
가야 뭐도 꼴이야 추버도 지어요 말아. 어디 디샤는다 디 영다도 로바스야 디 지대 힘을든 샤 인식도 와. 오메로 많이 라와. 어디서
so
닌지 거에 nem바이니 샤샤부터 가버리지. 닌지 nem그 거리미 지대면 째와 주고 말아. 어디 샤샤리.
So this is pertaining to where you asked that the things we talk about here seems like we in a sense how should I say attributing some kind of validity to the ignorance, right? Something like that. So Geshe wants to tackle that first. The whole presentation about true and false conventionality, whether it is from the objective point of view or the subjective point of view, that is completely done from the worldly knowledge or perspective. Nothing to do with emptiness, okay? And so we are really not touching the whole ignorance here, grasping at intrinsic reality or something, because that is not the preview of ordinary people, right? I mean, so we just simply leave it alone. We just ignore it, okay? We just don't talk about ignorance because ordinary people don't have a clue about this. We just let it be. So we just go with the ordinary worldly way. How do we know something is true, something is false, right? And that's a discussion based upon that. And so we don't need to talk about emptiness or don't need to realize emptiness in order to understand the difference between true and false conventionality because it's just according to worldly things.
저도 저 찍대 가지고.
다 지원이바 데이터 단다디 바나 다 세메 남사 시행 거 와게 양다다 로바세 와게 디 망체디 다 곰불 가사디 판덴 다와 잡게 거 와게 대잠기 디토리아 아네지 망보지 순가에 디 제롬부지 거 와. 망제 세가 되는 지 나거 와 컨테레스
다 피제 다 데려 제동 세면나야 되대 요래 단다 당기 유르고 무슨거다 유제나 있는 것을 딱 봐와 샤그리스다 디타데야 아니 그다다 영어 지대 타니를 최제 직바에는 야가 인도 줌바다 대반 지대 타니를 샤셔서 되게 시작 저는 지금 돼. 돼. 되게 디나 좋아. 다다 디줄 제르부터 마셔야 되다. 제르부 세시로 셔라 뭐 되게 시작 좋아 말에 디나 되게 동도.
알아다 디 망체디 저 알이 시접하다 되게 콘에 되는 거.
동도.
So with regard to the second point you raised about, where we talk a lot about the validity here, is that sort of emphasis put by the Rinpoche or, from your point of view, maybe Chandrakirti is not doing, it seems like that much. But Geshe says that, Rinpoche is, of course, illustrating all these points, but he is often referring, as we have seen in his book, back to, for example, the Arya Deva's 400 stanzas. Or sometimes the Chandrakirti is his own commentary on the things. So something they explain, now Rinpoche is kind of explaining most. It seems like Rinpoche is, right, doing it, but he's just simply illustrating it, right.
무다빨 되는 책레레스도 못와. 마샤데 다미 소미 다미 세어서시 제발 마샤 로어와. 제가 대 깝질이야 세가 또 자샤서 다 강가텔 켜고 거와
Nare.
어제 디레르 몽보야 제가 대여자 다다 저와 제고 차러와
Nare.
데미 대가가 세가 시바 또 저와 제고 할 셔고 봐
Nare.
제가 제르 지 디 힘줄 시야시
No,
단다 부열 다고니 디 따가고 제르 나이 힘줄 신가라요다
no, sir.
저와다 특세도 다다 너는 코로나 저장도 어디 맞다나 딱다 동도
No, sir.
미기 제르 지 양성수서는데 공산 민게데 지에미스다 자세 자이세 랍쇼다
6 di marbeke.
라
Pandit
특세
Davar.
번다리
Davena Rwa.
제 시켜본 저와서데 번다리
No, sir. No. Kishla just simply wants to recall what he said this some other time here. For us to be able to sort out all these arguments, basically it all refers to, where can we make a distinction between existence and intrinsic existence, right? Complete non-existence and non-intrinsic existence, right? And if we are not able to make those distinctions, then we will not be able to figure out all the arguments and things we are talking about here. And of course, in many ways, what has complicated these things for us is seems like in most of the texts, right? Oftentimes those things are not clearly explained. Maybe Chandrakirti did one of the best jobs in his clear word commentary, right? He started to make those distinctions. But in many other texts, oftentimes the qualifying characteristic, the attribute is dropped. So we have no nose, no ear, no tongue, no this, no. So we thought, okay, there's no, right? And so it gets very confusing, with those use of the terminologies and things like that. And so Chandrakirti did one of the most amazing things about making those distinctions. And then, of course, Aryadeva wrote a commentary on the Chandrakirti's, Chandrakirti wrote a commentary on the Aryadeva's 400 stanzas with the middle way. And so those are some of the really works that illustrated all these things for us. And so Jaramogi is considered as perhaps the person, master, who has done the thorough investigation of this matter. So he looked at the works of Chandrakirti and Aryadeva and everything, and did his best to explain it as explicitly as possible. So among the masters of Tibet, so Jaramogi is rated as the highest level who has done this tremendous job. Yes, Rena.
I think I'm missing a distinction between cause and effect, and then a relationship between the object and the perceiver,
right,
versus the things arising interdependently. So from the Savatantrika point of view, when they assert a cause and effect relationship between the object and the perceiver, because they assert intrinsic reality, it makes sense that they would use the word cause and effect. It makes sense that way. But when we stand on the Prasangika side, and we say there's a cause and effect relationship, but it's not an intrinsic cause and effect relationship.
Right.
But then when we explain it, we go into interdependence. So are we, in our system, equating interdependence with non-intrinsic cause and effect, or is there something there that I'm missing?
Okay, sure. Morangi da condition de insa da gi moran chuk sa ma chakan sana tanda rangju ba da de ma sedio kala ta anzo dir ba kan ta gi kharsho gor da yu de yijeng gi ten de be wa she go wa ge yu de yijeng ni di ju da ka junde gi ten de be wa she wa ina din de yo ba de rangan de be ten de be wa res la wa ge so da di indio kala koran za da mara samla na ya rangan de be wa che be na ko ju da de wu cha shu go de ten de be wa yo shu go so wa ge da tanda ten yo ba ge sedio kan la wa ge an yu de yijeng ni di wa ge rangan de be wa yo ma re junde ge wa yo wa sedio kan la ko ten de be wa sedio kan la ga sik de ten de ba la wa sam ge wa ge rangan ne mondu ba wa ane taji do di zonda ro ko go go ba so
어디래 땡때 버스디다 땡때셔야 돼 롱은 주가 가게 로도와 그다 땡주 동배 동대셔 동배 땡주 동셔 어디서 거다
no so
디스 때 세베 다가랑 게 추도 가지고 와 건지실 때로 그런 언제 지도 매 그런 거들 랑자 펴다 세 해는 모두 그런 지도 랑자 토그리 해야지 뭐래 다시다 거 시는 데 우리 거 가요 못 사줘라.
Right.
어디나 이다 대요 가리데 가가 때 거지. 어디 댄스도 장 롱무 줘지고.
Yes, from Prasangika's perspective, which we usually follow, the term interdependence itself suggests or indicates that there cannot be intrinsic reality, existence. If something is dependent on something else, that kind of relationship, then that says that thing cannot exist on its own, right? So the term, yes, the mutual dependence or interdependent dependence, that's why we said, being able to realize that dependent arising means emptiness. Emptiness means dependent arising, right? So that's what the Prasangika, explains. So dependence always precludes independent existence, intrinsic existence. It's just like in an ordinary sense, we say, hey, she's a very independent person. What does it mean? It means she stands on her own feet. She doesn't rely on other people. She's not a dependent, person, right? If somebody says, oh, this person is very dependent on others, right? That means he or she couldn't survive on her own. So that's kind of similar notion, yeah.
Yeah, but the question is not that. The question is reference to cause and effect versus non-intrinsic cause and effect. That's what the distinction I'm trying to make is here. So in the Savatantrika, it's clear that they would assert intrinsic cause and effect relationship.
Right.
But in the Prasangika, we're saying there's no intrinsic cause and effect relationship. There's an interdependent
Cause and effect.
Well, here's the thing. So the question: are we equating? Are these terms the same, or like the interdependent relationship and non-intrinsic cause and effect? Are those two the same in our system? That's the question.
Okay, moragda tan discourse tanda karso jude debi namsha shabro wage tanata rangju ba menje ge jude debi namsha de ranga de jude debi namsha yebe sondan de moral tegi saro wa ta tanda di karso gore tenju be lu la wage nganzo ge discourse wa ta karso ranga de jude ke te chogoro yomar wage chedan jude debi and ten ba se da gara di ranga de jude wage jude debi mebachro wa ta ju mebachro wa til 다가랑 땡고 그러서 세르와 그래서 다까지 준대 남상한테 shago de 경 고추 메면도 와게 가서 걸다 랑원에 만루나 주대 되는 남사 사죠 와게
뭔가 준대도 당아도 락바 살지네 그래서 내가 지대 버지 다 동도 타야도 싱타야도 준대 배동신 코 때데 체는 아직 뭐 통하여 봐
네네
어디나 이 준대 남에 저도 찍어라 봐 다들 되게 로주 스타 메제스나 코나다 유크랑 원 지금 네바데 동거 뭐도 지금 윤제 때문에 그게 저디 드블도 말아 또 말아 저 태교하고 유 드블도 와셔버려 태교 두모 말이 관계다 드블 줄도 와도 그 강가 샤고로 와 드블 줄도 그 와다 너 대반다 쓰이네 직발에 드블 줄도 그러 와다윤 드블도 인 태교 뭐도 요 말아
알레론스
어디래 그래서 그 드블 써야지 윤 드블도다 그랬어 그 줄라야 가래 그 지부 유에서 줄라로 주면 줄라야 요 말아 어디 뭐도요 주딘 지부를 깨하게 해서 말아 그 줄도야 가대서 그 지부 지게에서 줄라로 어디 되게 쓰고
다른 뭐 디스도게 준대들 야 랑신 주베 준대 남사제다 랑신 뭐르베 준대 남사제 샤요 그래서
다 태교로서는 랑신 주베 기다려 요 말아 다 누즈카로 다 로지 메지 되게 랑신 주베 기도 코나 샤그러와 태교가 랑신 뭐로 기대 샤그러와
랑신
계단 게득 레 계단 데드 계단 가가데 지과래 다 딱서 제바지 좀 도어로 베이지 시담이 태교 받데 되게 요인세 랑신 부터 메게 인세 되데 요 말아
So Geshe says that that depends upon the philosophy standpoint of each different schools. As we said, Savatantrika Madhyamikans and schools below, for them, cause and effect relationship necessarily mean intrinsic cause and effect relationship, right? But for the Prasangika Madhyamika, nothing exists intrinsically at all. So therefore, when they say interdependence or cause and effect relationship, it always means non-intrinsically right cause and effect relationship, because there is no intrinsic cause and effect relationship at all possible, right? So for them it equates, in that sense. So something, as part of that explanation, what Geshe said is, I think all Buddhist schools of thought, accept how outcome or the result is dependent upon its causes. So that they all accept it. But it seems it's the Prasangika who said that the cause is also dependent upon the result, right? Others, they don't talk about that, right? Because why we say, why is this a cause? Well, because from the point of view of the result, right, outcome, it is asserted as a cause. So that's the kind of distinction. So for our school, meaning if we follow the Prasangika Madhyamika school thought, which we usually do, so cause and effect relationship, interdependent means non-intrinsic cause and effect relationship.
Yeah, and just another further distinction. Sometimes we use the word correlate to we say that they're correlated rather than one is causing the other. So is that a more valid way to speak about it, or let's say more accurate way to speak about it, rather than say cause and effect?
Oh, I see.
Cause and effect kind of brings up the idea of something caused something.
That's
this came before that one, and that one came after that one.
Yes.
So with
I got it. Yeah, I got it. Yeah. Morang this go again. That and anzo namju kaso korata tanda. Kuda debi namsa share wage. Tako tende be dewa chura rangshin dube kunde debu inere mandi be dache de wage. Sidan tanda tende se koden de la wage. Kunde ke tende be dewa mai be wage. Chu chig chig ten sa jwa kuda debi me ba. Di share be na tonda di chi chana capture de yaga chago la kande so.
The tende se tenju with tende se the tende the tende the pita disha word. Tende sum show,
no.
The same of a menti tende se the global medical union or shagmarwa.
No, so.
That in Rangi Vaga young Chashi tende shazi, tende chick shower, tende late go ingo marwa. That take you a tickle, I never Chashi woman, but double thousand with tende surgery. You can go double thousand of the Yukon said the tende must something do. Some year.
No.
Oh, they didn't try yet.
No. Chilical that and like dear up and the Kunde tenders mix magabse, the tender be dewas as your work and two chisel then what?
Two drops said. Two drops said. The Rangi means the young till there's on the D. You say, the thing you again. Tirikesha Omarwa, President of said it. I got the daughters, the President of said, till the Dudan, the Jewish and the Shakis and the Dash in the Dudan Somsidua. President of said it. I did it.
So we find three different kind of understandings or levels of understanding of dependent arising, Tendal, Pratisamutpat. According to, say, Chittamatrins and schools below, for them, dependent arising actually only applies to what we call functional things, right? And there's cause and effect relationship, and that's the kind of thing they talk about. So dependent arising primarily means cause and effect relationship. According to Savatandika Madhyamikins, one school above, they said, yes, that is true, but then dependent arising also means for them, how things are dependent upon its different parts, right? There's no cause and effect relationship, but for something to exist, it has many different parts. It's dependent on its parts, right? Sort of relativity. So that's their notion. And then according to Prasangika Madhyamikins, they said, yes, we accept both of those levels of understanding dependent arising, but at the highest level, they said everything is merely labeled, right? That's what it means by dependent arising. So, how should I say, so cause and effect relationship is one kind of dependent arising. It doesn't pervade to all existence. But in some cases, I think the terminology we use, correlational existence, I think that seems to apply more with the sense of relativity, I think, right? How things are, exist relatively, right? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So now then there's the third one, which that they arise, they're just merely imputed.
Merely labeled,
so is
right?
there another, there's another word for that? If we're using correlation for the second one, is there something
right.
else for that?
The third one, in the Tibetan word, we call it tokda, merely labeled, right? Tokda getendel. That means dependent arising of merely labeled. Right, that's what it is.
Okay, so we're just saying the relationship and the actual.
Right, we just use the term, right? Yeah, qualify it. Yeah. Any more questions? Yeah, one more. Yes.
It's Pam's question. It's about the particles.
Sure.
Because she says.
Who?
Pam. that actually Buddha taught partless particles. Did he actually was that or was it an invention of the lower systems?
Okay.
Is it possible for the Buddha? So I'm arguing with her. Is it possible for the Buddha to have taught something that's not even conventionally existent?
Okay, sure.
I
I'll
think
check
I'm
with
wrong.
him. Da kan di shwe di dir gen da da ging anzu du chame share wa gen mo kolan chi ge le du sere te de na ton di ngir wa gen sanji chomden de gi du chame ro wa ko sung bo res ro wa du chame she yo ro ba sa ro ba ki sanji chomden de gi du chame she yo man ane me ba ji sanji gi she de ro kan de res ko da
다디 다른 부분이 지게 쉬어버와
몰라네
디다 디샤미데 산지 해기데 쉬고 말이 디산지 해시는 요거라
몰라네
그래서
몰라네
다시 너 산지 디샤미 위에서는 송소로 디제도 송소로 디샤미 해데 쉬고 말이
알아 다디 송에 디 단다 제만이로 송셔서
다 제막콜 내가 디샤미 위에서다네요 그런 될 때니 질랑도시데 디샤미 소사 디레가 랑도 디게디 뻥나신 신이 콜 찍게요 말에 뭐 디레 뭐 디샤미도 말아
라레 알아 다 간지 디샤미 두다데 상전이 중대 시쇼
중요해요 디샤미 산지 송해요 그래서
so did Buddha talk about partless particles, right? The answer to that question is yes. And that's how the Bible seekers and Southern thinkers philosophy came about, right? They said that's what Buddha said. And Buddha, now if we ask, is that Buddha's real viewpoint, right? His own assertion as well? No, because they don't exist. You know, Buddha couldn't assert as his own position where something don't exist. But he said it, as we said, Buddha taught according to the dispositions and capacities of different individuals. So for those people, right, who have so much belief in the partless particles, Buddha said, you know, to be able to help them and, you know, do the practice. So he went with them, so to speak. So he talked about partless particles, yeah.
어디서 리히님들 송라를 송샤와 있는 산지 공부에 자꾸 말했어. 그래서 산지 송샤된 산지 그런 거는 kenya가 유지 그베안 그선 그런 하기나 갑도 그베안서 니여서 송하고 공부이나 송로 송하고 공부 많이 장 송라이 통도 샤고 니여도 세와 송하고 공부 송라고 많이가 이게 찍게 다 송하고 공부 많이 나 송라 통도 샤고 야지 그러와 다다 시동 컬러 당분도 또 샤고 이제 그러와 뒤샤라도 뒤샤메 된 여러와 그 송라고 통도 샤고 그러와 나 다샤도메 뒤샤메 샤고 말와 어디지
in the essence of eloquent explanation, like Shen Yingbo, Geshe said, there is a very powerful statement that's made, which is something like, you know, we have to find out the distinction between what is the real intent of the author or the speaker and what is being said. You know, sometimes authors might write about something, but that's not necessarily their own viewpoint or the assertion. Okay? And sometimes, yes, it is both what they wrote about and what they believe in. And so in the case of partless particles, I think in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, Buddha talked about it. So that's how Bible seekers and Southern thinkers went with that. Now, did Buddha talk about it? Was that the part of his first discourses? Yes, right? But if you say, is that what really Buddha believed in, his real position? The answer is no, right? So there are things Buddha said. Not only he said it, but he believed these things. But there are things Buddha said, but he really did not think, you know, believe in those things, right? So we have to make those what we call distinctions. So the content of the textbook and the real intention of the authors or the speakers. Right? Sometimes they overlap and sometimes they don't. You have a question right at the back? No. So, no, okay. So we'll stop there today, or if we have one more? Go ahead. Okay. Desha Chochikin. Kangen Lode, Dimye, Dinda, Ninda, Nanda, Rabsebe, Shinye, Dungun, Jishin, Sije, Nije, Tuga, Lebamze, Kanda, Sebe, Zara, Mare, Mendun, Dunge, Yese, Rozo, Gula, Boje, Daze, Yala, Joju, Yanden, Sun, Roza, Shiro, Nimo, Leye, Jado, Dreze, Mare, Muse, Dunge, Nyugo, Chinye, Chunze, Rade, Dene daje saju dazo yende lunzo yese tuwe ku chura chuda jambe yongla ye omara bazanda Omarambazana de Sende Jeje Jera Veseje Dalu Temu Mumbara Kada Denje Shunlu Toba Lode Bobe Nawan Zedo So Lode Jazu Udon Beba De Gezan Pome Judo Memba Shen Temba Zemba Wando Jizu Kanyen Shogun Cha So on the page 21. Obeisance to my Guru and protector Manjushri, who holds at his heart a scriptural text, symbolic of his seeing all things as they are, whose intelligence shines forth as the sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of Father for his only Son, all creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You whose dread and thunder-like proclamation of Dharma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and free us from the iron chains of our karma, who wills this sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of ignorance. You who have been pure from the beginning, who have completed the stages achieving the highest perfection of a bodhisattva, whose princely body is adorned with 112 marks of a Buddha, I bow down to you, Manjushri, Om Arabaza Na Di. O compassionate one, with the brilliance of your wisdom, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind. Enlighten my intelligence and wisdom so that I may gain insight into Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. Page 31. Like the sweet perfume of white lotus, born in the ocean of knowledge, nourishing honeybees, the fortunate being, your fame pervades all directions. You are proficient and powerful in upholding the precious doctrine. To you, O Lobsang Tenzin Wangda, respectfully I pray.
Nhất tâm kính lễ Đức Văn Thù Sư Lợi, bậc đại trí ngài điều phục hai chướng ngại, tựa nhật quan lan tỏa khắp mười phương, bậc thực chứng chân nghĩa màu rốt ráo, từ tim ngài Bát Nhã Kinh thủ hộ nhiệm màu, cõi luân hồi chúng sanh thọ nghiệp báo, bị ngăn che bởi phiền não vô minh, sở hữu 60 pháp âm thù thắng, cùng đại bi ngài hóa độ chúng sanh, tựa từ mẫu chăm lo cho quý tử. Tiếng rồng vang ngài thức tỉnh hữu tình, thoát khỏi vòng luân hồi nghiệp chướng, gươm trí tuệ ngài chặt đứt vô minh, tận diệt muôn ngàn khổ đau cùng ách nạn, trường tử Như Lai tối thắng toàn giác. Báu thân ngài pháp 112 tướng hảo Như Lai, đê đầu đảnh lễ Đức Văn Thù Sư Lợi, cúi xin ngài tận diệt ám chướng vô minh. Om Arapasana Di. Ban pháp lực diệt phiền não vô minh, được trí sáng con thâm nhập nghĩa màu, pháp phi diệu cùng muôn vàn luận giải, như diệu hương ngọt ngào từ sen trắng, đản xanh nơi trí thủ thắng đại dương, hàng thiện căn như ong mật thọ nương, hồng danh ngài khắp mười phương quảng bá, đấng thiện xảo uy dũng bảo tồn pháp bảo vô giá. Nam mô Lúc Sang Tenzin Quang Đắc, xin cung kính trì niệm.
Re ra lin je nyen de sang je jin do me de we wa ye ro we nan da jin she wa jo kan re ra we go we xin gan de pen dan de wa ma le zhong we ne chen re ze wa den jin jiao zo ye xia we se de ma den jo je ye dan gu ru ra na man de la ne yan da